I'm Meg Charlie. Again, you'll never forget my name. I teach in philosophy and also in the Humanities 110 course. And I'm excited to have my colleagues introduce themselves. And the way we'll proceed today is each of us will give, from our own perspective, some ideas for how we think you can help your student begin their academic journey here at Reed and beyond. And then we will open it up for questions from all of you, and we'll try to linger afterwards if you have additional questions. We'll look forward to hearing from you. So I'm going to turn it over. Do you go ahead and introduce yourselves, and then we'll give you some thoughts.
Hi, I'm Pancho Savory. I am in the English department, and I teach in Hum 110. So yesterday morning, when I met my Hum 110 class, I told them that I had been roped into doing this. And I said to them, what should I say? And they gave me a bunch of ideas, and I wrote them down. First, I always say to new first-year advisees, the most important lesson that you can learn as a first-year college student is time management. Sometimes students think that because they only have to take 3 courses, that the workload is going to be relatively easy, and that turns out not to be the case. So a lot of times students have difficulty balancing between work time and playtime. So here are the things that they said. These are things that you theoretically should have told them or are telling them. The first student said, make sure you tell us to eat breakfast. Having a balanced sort of schedule so that you wake up at the same time every day and go to bed at the same time every day. Making sure you get enough sleep. Making sure you have time to chill out as well as work. If you're having trouble in any of your classes, the best thing to do is either to go and talk to the individual faculty member, or there's a whole, we have a whole sort of tutoring services run by students. And sometimes it's easier for students to get help talking to other students than talking to faculty members. But also take advantage of faculty members' office hours. No, I say to my students, I remind them, I am here to be of service to you. And when I'm in my office during my office hours, if you don't come and see me, I sit in there all by myself. and I get lonely. And I stare out the window. So please come and see me. I also give my students my home telephone number, and one of the things I say to them is that if I didn't want you to call me at home, I would not be giving you my phone number. And therefore, under the pain of death, if you call me up at home and the first sentence out of your mouth is, sorry to call you at home, then you pay the penalty. One student said to me that to remind parents about grades, and that grades are not a reflection of who you are as a person. You know, people want to get good grades, but good grades is not the be-all and end-all of life. Always be ready and happy to ask questions. Again, I can't say this enough. We as faculty members are here to be of service to students, and the more they take advantage of that, the easier their life will be. In writing papers for Hum 110, I also encourage my students to give me a rough draft. And I say, I guarantee that if you give me a rough draft, your paper will be better than if you don't give me a rough draft. But that means working on your paper early enough so that you have time to get it to me, I have time to read it and give you comments, and then you have time to deal with whatever comments I have given you. Also to take advantage of career counseling. Life Beyond Reed is really good. Also, if your student is a member of any kind of minority, there are various kinds of affinity groups, and students should take advantage of those. Two last things. One student said a really good piece of advice is that students should never do schoolwork in their rooms because it's too easy to get distracted, and it's much better if you go and work in the library. And the very last piece of advice I got was, make sure you have a raincoat. So that is my advice.
Okay, can you hear me? That's a hard act to follow. I agree with everything Pancho said. I'm Kristen Scheibel. I'm professor of religion and humanities. And religion always kind of throws people off because you probably didn't send your child to Reed to get a degree in religion, and I'm okay with that. I'm also a professor of Buddhist studies in particular, and that kind of shapes the way that I'm thinking about advices. Can you raise your hand if you have a first-year student or a transfer student? Okay, so yeah, the entire crew. Great, because the world is open, right? They're making their connections and they're connecting with their curiosities. I'm also a parent of a senior in college right now, and I know how much I try to guide my student through what I know pretty intimately. This is not only my career, but I spent a lot of time in school and graduate school. This is my terrain. I feel like I know it well. And it's really hard to just let her do her thing. And so my biggest advice to parents like me out there is to let your student do their thing, because they are going to seek out their own intellectual conversation partners, their own life advancement coaches. And we can do all we can do to support them, but at the end of the day, they're here and you're not. And that's so hard. It is very hard as a parent. I recognize that. But back to that, the freshman year in particular is a strange year for a student. It is a major, major life change for them with a lot of their own time management issues, which I think Meg will also talk about. Time management, I think, is the big takeaway. But I'm going to speak about a slightly different edge of that, which is that every moment you can kind of reinvent yourself. And some of you may have already seen this. Your students may already be very different than they were when you left them off. And they might have different intellectual inspirations and questions. They might have found some good conversation partners in domains that you wouldn't necessarily have picked for them. The beauty of freshman year is they can take just about anything that we offer, and they can sample widely, even as they are restricted by our first year curriculum. Because everything will make sense in the end. We advisors, we're pretty good at showing them the map that is their trajectory through Reed. And we can say, look, yeah, you wanted to take that art class. Great, that counts for a requirement. So I would say let them explore their intellectual interests, their creative curiosities. Just about everything is cooking them into the person that they're trying to become. And on the flip side of that is send them to their advisors or have them connect, make sure that they're connecting with their professors, going to office hours, seeking Pancho out, because apparently he needs some students to come find you. Mm-hmm. Just kidding. But that's also, sometimes we know more about our students than they sometimes know about themselves in the classroom. And I'll just give one little anecdote. The last Rhodes Scholar, for example, our most recent Rhodes Scholar was a Buddhist studies student of mine, had no idea what the Rhodes was. So sometimes just having conversations with faculty over time, we get to know them. So a lot of research bears this out, including 2001, Richard Light wrote a very famous book about college success, and connecting with faculty members in office hours is just about one of the biggest things your student can do to have kind of a successful experience. So again, let them find their intellectual curiosities, even if it's something that you have zero interest in.
Okay, thank you, Kristen and Pancho. Thank you. So I think what I'm going to say echoes a lot of what they're saying, and I love that the students themselves have already started to see the things that I'm about to say, and I think that should make you feel really confident that they are ready to be here at college. They are ready to, see their futures and even start to see the kind of path that's opening up in front of them. They kind of know, in some sense, what they're supposed to do. And what I was getting from the students' comments from Pancho is that, look, drill down on the basics, go to bed, eat your food. Basically, try to control the things that you can control. I'm teaching Stoicism right now, so this is in that zone. Try to control the things you can control so that your mind can be free to explore. And I think one of the big shifts from high school to college is to be able to see what I would like to call a mountain with stairs. What are the big projects that you have, for example, in a semester? Like papers or tests, how do you see the steps leading up to those big projects? That's to go from a kind of high school mindset where you're looking on your interface that says, tomorrow the assignment is this, to thinking more broadly. A lot of your students probably were able to get by in high school with writing their papers the night before. You may not know that they did this, but they probably did. And now they have all these opportunities to speak with their professor, to identify intermediate steps, and to identify the process that's most efficiently going to get them into the position to learn the most and to improve with each paper. And so I would encourage your student to really start seeing what those steps are and to engage their professors in helping identify them. In Humanities 110, I hope you're aware, after every paper, they have a paper conference with their professor for 20 to 30 minutes. We're giving them very, very detailed advice on how to kind of take their specific bundle of strengths and weaknesses, how to capitalize on those strengths, how to even use those strengths to transform weaknesses into new strengths. And so I give students, and I know many of us give students, very specific advice about how to use those study sessions, those kind of stepwise sessions to lead to the next best paper. And what I tell students is have some fun. This is really important. It should not be underestimated. And I think especially with COVID, they need to have a good time. They need to make connections with friends. The intellectual community and just the kind of broader community with peers is absolutely crucial to their doing well here and to their, being happy and finding kind of lifelong fulfillment. That's really important. And so I encourage my students to, think of their study sessions even as precursors to going out with friends. Say, what is the optimal amount of time I study? How long can I stay focused? Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's an hour and a half, maybe it's 2 hours. Plan that little session and then say to your friends, let's meet for lunch, let's meet for dinner, let's meet to go do something fun, because they're much more likely to be motivated to actually work during that session if they have something fun to look forward to. And oftentimes talking with peers about their paper and so on can be really invigorating and make it fun. It should be fun to do this kind of work. So I encourage your student also to reach out to the professor and to say, okay, when it boils down to it, in a study session, given what you've seen from me, where should I start? Like, literally, what is the first step? Do I take out the book? Do I take out the paper? To know exactly what is going to be useful the fine-grained advice can be given by the professor, and that is a huge advantage, and that would be to make use of the incredible resources that we have at Reed, where you have somebody really paying attention to the details of, kind of where you are right now and where you could go. So those are some of my pieces of advice, and I'll look forward to any questions you might have. All of us will.
And don't be shy about asking questions.
Can you talk a little bit about the structure of the Hume course? I don't actually know much about the experience. So, do they switch faculty? Like, how does it work?
So you are with a group of 17 or 18 students. You are with that same group with the same faculty member for the entire year. And students write 3 papers in the fall and 4 papers in the other way around, 4 papers in the fall and 3 papers in the spring, and there's a final exam at the end of each semester.
And the conferences are run, it's conference style. So you come to class having read the materials, but the focus really is on the discussion of those materials, and it can be really dynamic and really fun to just be able to hear from everyone who's read the same text. And hopefully those groups turn into, college-long and lifelong friends. I mean, that's the hope.
And we do very consciously use the word conference, and that has a very specific meaning. At other schools they use the word seminar, which just means that there's a small number of people in the room, but it doesn't tell you what happens in the room. And conference not only means that there's a small number of people in the room, but it means that the primary intellectual energy in the classroom is supposed to come from the students. It is not supposed to come from us. So what I do is the first week of class, I do all the talking and explain how I want things to work. And then on Monday of the second week, I just walk into the room and I wait for somebody to start talking. And I say, if nobody says anything, we can stand here and stare at each other for 50 minutes. I have never had to do that. And I tell students I want to hear everybody's voice every time we meet.
I have a question. Last night we had the pleasure of taking our daughter out with 2 of her friends for dinner and asking them about their courses and how everything was going. And of course, what they all had in common was Hume. And they said, we love this class, but the workload is really heavy. We can't keep on top of the reading. And they said, do you think that that is expected to read every single thing for every single class? And how is it that I can manage this in bio and chem at the same time with those 3 classes or whatever else they're taking? Now, what advice would you have for parents to help their students managing through the heavy workload?
I love workload questions. So this is probably the biggest question we get from our first year advisees across the board is I'm taking intro bio, I'm taking intro chem, and I'm taking Hume. I'm a STEM major. Hume doesn't matter. But I always boomerang it and say, why did you come to Reed? Like, tell me what you wanted from a small liberal arts environment where we balance STEM with humanities. You could have gone to Caltech or MIT. Why did you choose Reed? And usually in that type of conversation with a professor, we frequently are able to get them to reinvest their own energies in positive ways. and take ownership. I just want to riff off Pancho here talking about conference. It's that idea of shared burden, but also the shared delight, the fun that is when we have an academic project that we share together. So talking about Hume, how does Hume feel when nobody does the reading? It sucks. It really does. I've taught in Hume. It's hard. It is a slog if people do not share. So I kind of want to push back on the idea that you should tell your students to coast in the classes that potentially don't matter if they're going on in STEM. Because, and I'll go back to creating a habit of mind and Aristotle here. Sorry to tread in your domain. I know this because I've taught Hume. But the idea of you're building yourself. And what kind of character do you want to have at the end of your 4 years? 4 years is a long haul, so you're building skills in your first year. Hume is just one opportunity to build those skills. So maybe you can't cover all the reading, but can you do half of it really intentionally and really well and have something to offer? And I'm not suggesting that that's a way to do Hume light, but it's a way perhaps to train yourself to accept more of the responsibility through time. So I would kind of boomerang it to your student and ask why they wanted to come here to have that balanced humanist STEM environment. That's the zeitgeist here. We do it. We do both.
And just to follow up on that, I'm always telling my students, no matter what field you choose to go in, the more things you know about other fields, the better you will be. If you're a scientist and you only know about science, you're not going to be as good of a scientist as you could be unless you also know something about literature and history and philosophy and art and psychology. The more well-rounded in whatever field you are, the better you're going to be at it.
Mm-hmm. And I can't help but add, I think part of your question too was about when it feels impossible, is it really expected that we do all of it, or kind of what is the thinking behind this incredible volume? I have a senior in high school. I know what AP classes look like. I know that they've only been, at least my son, you read like 4 or 5 books, and this time we're like reading an entire book in a week, right? So that's a really big shift. But I think each professor might give different advice. I often give my students advice on how much time they should be spending on the class for each class period. And then I always say, part of it is active reading. What are you doing with your text? Are you making, I tell them to have a little key in the front cover of their book. What themes are you tracking? What themes are you interested in? Are you interested in, justice themes, gender themes? There could be also some motifs for the book, like about fire, for instance. Are you making notes like that? And then I say, at a certain point, stop the clock. You're kind of done with your reading session, and now for the last 20 minutes, go back to the things you marked and start thinking about them. Because if you get really involved in some of these, kind of tracking some of these themes and everything, the next time you go back to read, you're really looking for things, you get excited, you might even get lost in it and read longer than you planned. Mm-hmm. So I think, thinking about your sessions in those kind of nuts and bolts ways, which again, I think your professor can really help with, go to the professor and say, hey, I'm not able to do all the reading, what should I do? But also learning how to read fast and slow. That's a really great skill. And all of us adults have kind of figured out how to read fast and slow. So it's great to have too much volume. How can you read fast and then also read slow? So I think that those are great skills, and kind of explaining the broader picture of why those are important is great. And I will put a plug in for some of the things my colleagues said. So one of our faculty members in the chemistry department got his undergraduate degree in ancient science, and actually I work on Aristotle's physics. He and I were talking at faculty lunch. He's like, oh yeah, I just did this project on a part. He's like, oh yeah, I wrote on that as an undergraduate, and then I went on. He actually is one of the creators of Impossible Foods, and now he's teaching here in the chemistry department. But it all began in ancient science, so it's kind of interesting.
Hi, I have a question. Can you give some insights in how we should talk to our children about how they should pick a major, what they should be thinking?
I do a lot of first-year advising, so yeah, I mean, we all do a lot of first-year advising, but in recent years, Reed has also done summer advising, and I did a bunch of that, and that was a big question that first-year students had a lot of anxiety about. We do ask that they choose a major by the end of their sophomore year, and a lot of people think of majors as pre-professional tracks. But if you read the research and literature, very few students end up in a field directly related to their undergraduate major at a liberal arts college. I'm okay with that, and probably you are if you sent your child to a small liberal arts college. The strength is so many of our majors speak to skill sets and transferability. So I have a student who's a religion student in med school right now. That can happen at a place like Reed, even when you choose a religion major, for example, to keep beating down my department. But I think the best thing to do is to have them interrogate where their questions, like what domains their questions are in. When I deal with freshmen, it's too much to ask them, what do you want a thesis on? Like that's 4 years from now, and it's a giant year-long intellectual project, and they really don't know. But sometimes they have a cluster, a constellation of questions that, kind of Meg's idea of tracking your interests, they're already doing that. They kind of know things that they're interested in. They may not know what fields most adequately support those modes of inquiry. And so just connecting with your first-year advisor, who may or may not be in the field that you marked on your little sheet when you came to Reed, and just talking about the types of questions that you have. Sometimes an advisor can help guide you, like, oh, geez, this sounds a little bit like psychology might be in your wheelhouse. How about let's try and fulfill one of these requirements with a psych class and get you some exposure to see if that is your area. Because the first couple of years really is the opportunity to explore those fields. And again, like I said before, the way that we track our requirement system, just about everything can be utilized. So it's not a sacrificed, course for you. So I would say start early and explore and ask questions.
How do you challenge and support the shy students, the introverts in your conference, which I love it, but how does this pulling these introverts into this very engaging and dynamic?
So when we have paper conferences, after every paper, one of the things that I ask every single student to do every time is to evaluate your in-class performance. Are you talking enough? Are you talking too much? Are you talking too little? If you're not talking enough, why is that the case? And one of the things that I remind students of, we spend a significant amount of time talking about Greek democracy in the course, and I remind people that even though Greek democracy had all kinds of problems, the extent to which it was successful was because all the citizens were actively participating in the process. And so what I say to my students is we are in the classroom, we are trying to essentially recreate our own little Greek city-state. And each of us is a citizen. And the Greek city-state in the classroom is not going to function to its best ability unless all the citizens in the room are actively taking part. Because if you have a class where the conversation is dominated by 3 or 4 people all the time, that gets really boring really quickly. And I also say to people, there are other places you could have gone that don't require you to talk. And I'm assuming that if you chose to come to Reed, you are aware of the fact that you are expected to talk in the classroom and that it is a part of your grade. And if you don't talk, then that's the problem. And again, you're not being a good citizen if you are not actively participating in what's happening in the classroom.
I'd add too to what Pancho said is to really, I try to work with my students to think about what are the strengths of being a more quiet person, being somebody who listens perhaps more. That's actually a huge strength in a class. So, and if they're good, a lot of times I note that, students who are really good orally are sometimes not as good in written work and vice versa. So how do you convert skills in written work into skills in oral presentation or oral speaking? So I talk to them about doing pre-writing before class, or even just sending me, gosh, this is a question I'm thinking about before class. What do you think about it? I'm happy to give them feedback. The other thing is, at the very beginning of class, I always start class by turn to the person next to you and generate a question. And often in those, come up with a hypothesis, or where would you look in the text for an answer to that? Or kind of begin an inquiry. And, in those kinds of small conversations, they can often find, some good things in their partner that they're sharing with, and they'll often give voice to those considerations. So if there's a quieter person, people will be like, oh, so-and-so in the small group said this amazing, cool thing, and often credit each other. And then I also talk to the people who talk too much. I'm like, how are you going to help move the conversation around the class? Everybody kind of plays a little role, and everybody needs to be, figuring out a way to make the conversation more even. And I think ultimately it ends up working out to capitalize on those strengths, and even just keeping track of what people are saying, and once in a while saying, it sounds like here is where we've come in the conversation. That's a really valuable thing. And also kind of going back to that idea of making a little key in your book, pointing out a passage that might be relevant to the conversation. Those are all things that people who are a little bit quieter can do and are honestly game changers in the classroom. So thinking expansively about what it means to participate, what it means to contribute, how can you use the strengths you have as a quieter person to turn those into real advantages for the whole group. That's kind of how we're thinking about it.
I had a question. So we hear a lot about the Center for Life After Reed, and there's so many opportunities for the students to explore life outside of the college. But right now, our first-year students seem so, they're so understandably focused on, their courses right now and their friends group right now, and so I'm wondering, when is that natural transition for them to start, thinking about those things and thinking about opportunities outside of the classroom, and how, as parents, can we support that, since we can't really do that for them?
We work really closely with the folks at CLBR as faculty members. So we're working with your students too. So frequently we're kind of like the Yenta. We'll grab students and say, hey, there's this internship. So sometimes that's on our radar screen. But what can you as parents do? I would say don't push, because first year they're trying to read for Hume. They're trying to get to bio lecture on time. And their interests will start dictating. As they find friends, they will be swept up into a SEEDS program, or they will quite naturally gravitate toward extracurriculars. We also have a lot of co-curricular things. So sometimes it's very natural. If you are a STEM student, for example, you might find yourself in conversations in lab about teaching youth here in Portland, and then suddenly find yourself doing tutoring or outreach through those programs. But that's something that parents, it would be very difficult for you to do the research through CLBR and help navigate. So I would say that is one area not to have anxieties during your student's first year, that that should be an outgrowth, because in high school, of course, I'm looking out at parents who produced pretty good students. So you probably urge your students to do community service and to be the full package student for college. But now it has to kind of come authentically. This is the 4 years where they are designing who they want to be in the world. And I would say it's okay if they're not connecting necessarily. If you're worried about your student being like maybe a reticent student is not connecting anywhere, that is a red flag, and I would reach out to student services. So I mean, my advice is for the students for whom college is just overwhelming, let them find their footing, especially this first semester.
We have time for only maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
This is a follow-up really on that last question, if it's all right, as really just more specifically, do you guys have recommendations or thoughts of what's a good way to use the in-between time in summer, especially that first summer after first year where they've gotten used to so much of the...
Do you mean, did you say how to use the summer?
Yeah, just some thoughts on what are good ways you think of, especially that first summer after freshman year.
Recover.
Yeah.
There's another.
I mean, I would just, there's also the idea of talking to, peers that are in potential majors that they're interested in. What are they doing for the summer? What are they reading? It's not like it has to be some particular outcome for the summer, but connecting with students who are in majors you're interested in, that's always a great thing, and they may have some ideas, as well as, of course, the faculty.
And also later, labs, your students might work in the lab. My daughter has worked in the lab 2 summers in a row, and that's paid for. So there are opportunities, but maybe that first year, I like Pancho's idea.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question that builds on this as well. I want to ask about the faculty's own outreach, because I think there's a structural challenge, especially in the liberal arts, because you don't have these research folks up on top who might be out there doing. I work at Cornell, and we've got extension, and they're all out. And small liberal arts colleges don't have that outreach, and maybe the faculty are not doing that kind of research themselves to get folks out there. So I'm wondering, can you speak to that and how that, so I guess really the question is undergraduate research. Because frankly, putting people, I mean, we do it at Cornell, we put people out in a community for a semester or 2, and that's pretty light. If you want long-term systemic change, and I'm just wondering, yeah, that's my question.
Go ahead. Can I dive in? I want to disabuse the notion that we are not researchers, right off the bat. No. No, we don't have graduate students, but we are very connected scholars. So right now I'm chairing one of the major units of the American Academy of Religion. So in my field, having these positions of responsibility mean that we are really connected. So we're placing students well in terms of graduate programs, and we're placing students well at the upper levels in terms of summer internships. So I wouldn't worry about that. And coming from institutions, I came from Harvard, for example, where it's great that there are graduate students and that you get a sense that your student gets plugged in these ways. We do things a little differently here, and it's a little more intimate. So the professors actually are the ones who get to know the students. So totally. But I would just not be concerned really about the outreach piece, because it's pretty hands-on here, I would say. So on that way, it's probably more like Dartmouth than one of the big, the bigger R1 type research institutions where your student will never get to know their faculty member. Here they know the names of our children. I mean, it's really kind of an intimate place. So we're having our eyes and we have our fingers on the pulse of where your kids are wanting to go. And that's, I think, the advantage, of the small liberal arts.
A strong advantage, because if you go to a bigger school, your first 2 years, probably all of your teachers are going to be graduate students. and you're going to get very little contact with real faculty members. And that is one of the great things about Reed, is that from the first day, you are having contact with real faculty members all the time. We don't have graduate students here, so we are what you get.
Yeah, and just to give an example, last weekend I hosted a conference, an ancient philosophy conference, and instead of having a professor give the formal comments on another professor's paper, I said, would it be okay, asked my colleagues, would it be okay if my students collaborated and did the formal comments for the professor? And they said, okay, great. Nobody's ever done that, but sure. And so we took class time, we collaborated. I have 9 students in an upper division class. We collaborated, and they presented the comments, and the professor was totally blown away. Couldn't believe that the students had really generated this incredible set of comments. And it was great, because when I came back to class then the next week after the weekend conference, I said to the students, I'm like, what did you learn? And they said, what I learned was that the faculty are so humble and open to, getting feedback. They're like, I noticed that they were actually excited when people criticized them, and they were open to exploring, further in depth on the topic that they were looking at. So they were noticing all of these habits of mind of people who really are able to, write and work on this research. So they saw behind the curtain. Instead of just reading the finished product that comes out in a journal, they had, as undergraduates, an opportunity to look behind the curtain of how these kind of more polished pieces are made, and felt like they were actually part of that project. And I wouldn't be surprised once this professor ends up publishing the piece that he presented in this workshop, that he will credit those students as giving him some really good ideas moving forward. So it's that kind of opportunity that I think we are able to offer our students here, and it's super unique in this kind of liberal arts setting. So. Okay, well, thank you so much for spending the day with us.